Welcome tonight. This special evening is a combined presentation of LaSalle University's Graduate and Professional Studies Speaker Series and LaSalle's Presidential Speaker Series. So this is a first time that we combined and co-sponsored such an event, and we're pleased to do so. I'm Eric Turner. I'm the Vice President of Graduate and Professional Studies here at LaSalle. And along with, here with me is Chelsea Weicker, our Vice President of Development and Alumni Relations. And Chelsea and her group help support the Presidential Speaker Series, and my group helps support the GPS Series. Together, we're filling in tonight for President Michael Alexander, who was unable to be with us tonight. So hopefully we can do that appropriately, and we'll tell him that we did a good job. Okay. The other thing I'd like to do is recognize we have, I think, 3 of our trustees here. We've got the Vice Chair of our Board of Trustees, Jerry DeRoche. We have our immediate past Chair of the Board, Dick Blankstein. And another one of our trustees, Laurie Pascal. Thank you all for being here and supporting us in this endeavor. So we're glad everyone here was able to join us. Thank you for that. This evening we're excited to present our guest speaker. And to this end, we're pleased to ask Professor of Communication, Dr. Janice Barrett, to formally introduce Ambassador Burns. She's got a strong personal relationship with Ambassador Burns, and we think it's appropriate that she be the one to make that introduction. Dr. Barrett.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And it was so nice to see all of you here tonight. I am absolutely thrilled that Nick has agreed to join, Ambassador Burns. We've known each other for a long time, and I was thrilled that he was able to be here tonight because he has an extremely busy schedule, as you all know. We are all very, very honored to welcome him. I think maybe you know that currently he's over at Harvard University as the Roy and Barbara Goodman Family Professor of the Practice of Diplomacy and International Relations. He's located in the John F. Kennedy School of Government, where he is the founder and faculty chair of the Future of Diplomacy Project and faculty chair of the Project on Europe and the Transatlantic Relationship at the Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. So it is extremely timely that he has agreed to be here as his responsibilities are in this area. Many of you may have even heard of this morning on NPR. He's also the executive director of the Aspen Strategy Group and the Aspen Security Forum. He's senior counselor at the Cohen Group, and he serves on the board of directors of Entergenes Incorporated. He is chairman of the board of Our Generation Speaks, which seeks to bring together young Palestinians and Israelis in common purpose. He has a long and distinguished career in foreign service before he joined Harvard. He served in the United States government as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs from 2005 to 2008, where he was the department's 3rd ranking official. He was U.S. Ambassador to NATO from 2001 to 2005, U.S. Ambassador to Greece from 1997 to 2001, and when he was serving in Greece, I took some of my students to meet him at his office in Athens, and of course he was very gracious. But the office was all decorated with Red Sox memorabilia. He was trying to persuade all the Greeks to become members of Red Sox Nation. Nick served as the State's Department spokesman from 1995 to 1997, and he worked on the National Security Council as a senior director for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia affairs. Very timely. And this was in a Republican administration for President Bush. But he also worked as a special assistant to President Clinton and director of Soviet affairs. He served at the American Consulate General in Jerusalem, where he coordinated U.S. economic assistance to the Palestinian people in the West Bank. And before that, he served in the American embassies in Egypt, and he was a member of the Secretary of State John Kerry's Foreign Affairs Policy Board from 2014 to 2017. Nick is a proud graduate of Boston College, as I am, the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and he earned a certificate at the University of Paris-Sorbonne. Please give him a warm welcome.
Barrett, Dr. Turner, thank you very much for the very warm welcome to the cell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. I learned something a long time ago. I grew up in Wellesley, Massachusetts, right next door. I went to the public schools, graduated from Wellesley High School, and had a very young teacher named Mrs. Barrett. And Mrs. Barrett is here tonight as a professor at LaSalle College. And when your high school teacher calls you, you speak. Because all of us really respected her as our teacher at Wellesley, but she went on to great things, PhD at Harvard, and professor at Harvard, professor at Boston University, now professor here at LaSalle College. So I really have a lot of respect for Mrs. Barrett, Janice, and I'm really pleased to be here. So there's nothing to talk about. We're talking about foreign policy. As Janice said, I spent my career as a Foreign Service officer. You have seen some of my friends on television the last 2 weeks. I worked very closely with Ambassador Masha Ivanovich. I worked very closely with Ambassador Bill Taylor. George Kent from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Harvard College, who testified last week, worked for me when I was Under Secretary of State. We're so proud of them. Because they were I think the public finally got to see who works as permanent employees of our government. We're accustomed to seeing military officers, and I honor the military. My wife and I have a nephew, Ben, who's a Marine Corps colonel right now, who's flown 200 combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. We honor them. Every family in the country has somebody in the military, whether it's our immediate nuclear family or our extended family. Everybody does. We have 2.5 million people in the military. We have 8,500 career diplomats. And now you've seen, I think, 5 of them respond to a subpoena by the House of Representatives and to testify. And they were all told by the State Department, the Secretary of State, and the White House, you cannot testify. But the oath we take as career officers is not to any president, it's not to any political party. In fact, we have to be nonpartisan. It's to the Constitution. Yes. And I think they all made the right decision to testify. You didn't hear a partisan word from any of them, including from David Holmes, who testified this morning alongside the brilliant Dr. Fiona Hill, if you watched the hearings. And so I was just proud of them because they did their duty to the country. You know, none of them recommended whether the president should be impeached or not. They just said, we're here as witnesses and we're happy to answer your questions. That's the world I came out of. I went into the Foreign Service essentially because the Vietnam War came into my family and my hometown, Wellesley, and my high school and my church when I was growing up in the 1970s. My dad was a World War II veteran and for most of the war supported the war, but he changed at the end. I remember my older brothers and sister and spirited discussions at our dining room table about the war. I remember that happening in our church at St. James Parish in Wellesley, Catholic Church. And I remember Jane Fonda coming to Wellesley College, which is a mile down the road, to demonstrate. And I was a typical high school kid. I was more interested in becoming shortstop for the Boston Red Sox. That never happened. And more interested in girls until, you know, when the war came into our community, there was no internet. We all remember that world. I just took a family atlas down. Where's Vietnam? I was 15 or 16, and that got me interested in geography, and I had wonderful teachers like Janice Barrett at Wellesley High School who got me interested in the world around us, and I just got, I took the bait, got interested in the world, became a high school exchange student, Europe, a college exchange student, joined the Foreign Service. So that's my story. I'm here tonight to talk about us, about the American people, about the challenges we face overseas. I have slides. I don't want this to be decked by PowerPoint. And I don't want to inflict a lot of slides on you, but I thought it might be helpful just so everybody could see the same thing that I'm talking about. I teach a course at Harvard, candidate schools, graduate students, master's and PhD students, called Great Powers. It's a course about the future. We look at the strongest countries in the world, the biggest economies, the strongest militaries, the most politically influential countries, the United States of America, China, Russia, the European Union, Japan, India, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina. And we try to answer two big questions. And this is a 3.5-month course. I'm going to teach it between January 29th and early May, this coming semester. Two big questions. How can we join, there are 195 nation states in the world, how can we all coalesce to take on the big human problems like climate change, trying to avoid war, trying to push forward on justice issues? How can we do that? And how are we doing on that? Or not doing well on that? Second question, how do we avoid the worst? How do we avoid what happened between 1914 and 1918? 17 million people died. At the height of the war in 1918, we had 2 million American troops, 1918, in Europe, fighting in France, up on the Marne River, July, August 1918. How do we avoid what happened between 1937, the Japanese invasion of China, and 1945, the Japanese surrender, the defeat of the Nazis, the defeat of Mussolini, 60 million dead, 60 million people died between 1937 and 1945. It's the greatest catastrophe in human history. We lost more people during that war than any other war in the history of the world, and we live in a world with far greater destructive power. This is before nuclear weapons. We dropped 2 atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August 6th and 9th, 1945. My dad was a Marine Corps aviator, flight instructor, training with his men for the invasion of Japan. I remember my dad, who I deeply, deeply revered, he's passed away now, saying they all expected 1 million casualties in the American invasion of the Japanese home islands. They thought the war might not end until 1947 or 48. So we did drop the A-bombs. Most of the people in the service felt liberated that we wouldn't have to have that war. We wouldn't have to have 1 million casualties. This is a hotly debated topic, including on your campus and ours. Were we right in dropping those bombs on the Japanese? And that's a question we're always going to have to debate. The World War II generation maybe saw it very differently for obvious and understandable reasons, maybe than my students, my kids might understand it. But 60 million dead? And so in my course we try to say, how do we avoid that? Because now we have nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological agents. Biological weapons can kill a lot more people than nuclear weapons. How do we keep them out of the hands of terrorists? It's a big world. My course tries to get students thinking about maintaining peace and avoiding the worst as we can. So I thought I might just go through a couple of slides, tell you how my students and I look at these issues, which is really about American leadership in the era of President Trump, and then we'll have a conversation. Does that sound reasonable? And if you get bored of the slides, just start moving. I'll get the message, and I'll stop. slides very quickly. This is a 3.5-month course in 25 minutes. So here's a map, a very inadequate map of the world. My students and I, by the end of the semester, I say to them, what have we learned? What are the major trends now in the world, positive and negative? What kind of world are we living in? What kind of challenges are we facing? I always start with the economy, because I learned at Boston College from Father Tom Gray, who taught American history in my sophomore year. It was a huge learning experience to be with that amazing professor. He said, you know, American history and politics, at the root of it all is the economy. When we think of power of any country, we think countries have political power, the ability to influence. Countries have military power, that's obvious, the ability to punch or defend. Countries have soft power. My colleague at Harvard, our former colleague, Genesis' former colleague, Joe Nye, say that countries have soft power, the attractiveness of your culture. And for the American people, what's our soft power? A Declaration of Independence, the Constitution is amended, the Bill of Rights, Lincoln, Martin Luther King, probably the most popular American around the world of the last half century is Martin Luther King. Hollywood, our tech companies, Apple, Google, Amazon. That's probably part of our universities. And boy, Boston area is the king when it comes to universities. But there's another dimension of power after political, military, and soft power. It's about the economy. And you really can't be capable as a military power or influential as a political power if your economy is not stable. So how are we doing? What are the trend lines? Well, most major economies are still in positive growth. Most major economies. We're going to grow at 1.75 or 2% probably, something like that. The IMF thinks this coming year in the United States, we're still in positive growth. But there's a but. This trade war is continuing. And these are the two heavyweight countries of the world, the 1 and 2 economies. We're still the largest economy, the United States of America. China is gaining on us, but not yet at our level. And we're locked in this perpetual trade war, and I have given up predicting when it's going to end, because I've been wrong every time I predicted it's going to end 2 months from now. It started last year. And the trade war, frankly, I do not blame President Trump for this. My view is the Chinese have been unfairly, I'll just say, ripping off the intellectual property of a lot of American tech companies, violating their World Trade Organization commitments. And I am not a Trump person, but I have to say this, the president's had a lot of guts to take on the Chinese. The question is, you don't want to hit a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. You want to have a glide path down, try to get the Chinese to compromise and act more in a more legal way. But this is causing jitters around the world, and it's costing our farmers in particular, including some Massachusetts companies, a lot of money. And at the same time, if the U.S.-China trade war ends, the European Union and the United States might go into a trade war because President Trump's threatening that. We have lots of differences between us and the EU, the European Union, on trade. That's normal. But the president is kind of a pugilistic guy, and he always wants to have trade war just to make things exciting in the reality TV series that he's running for the American people. And all these countries are beginning to slow. China was growing, most of the last 30 years, double-digit economic growth. No country had ever done that in the history of the world. China has grown faster and deeper in the last 30 years than any country's ever done. It's just been extraordinary. If you've ever been to China, my wife and I spent 2 weeks there this summer. Extraordinary economy. But they're slowing. India was growing at 7.5%. It was the world leader. It's back down to 5% growth. Germany's basically flatlined. That's important. Germany is the engine of Europe. It's the largest, most powerful manufacturing country in the world. It's flat. So I'm not an economist. There are a lot of people here who probably know a lot more about it than I do because you've been business leaders. But just look at the data and look at the trend lines. World productivity is slowing. At some point, we're in the largest and longest expansion in history. It's just inevitable. Markets go up, markets go down. At some point, we're going to slide into recession. I hope it's not this year. I hope it's not next year. But I think the signs are there. And that's very important if we look at trend lines. So that's trend line number 1. I've only got 5. That's number one that my class and I have looked at. Is a recession looming? We'll see. Trend line number two, and I think all of us are aware of this, the global balance of power is shifting. It's shifting. What do I mean by that in its largest macro dimensions? Since the end of the Second World War, the United States has been the undisputed power in the world through all those metrics of power, political, military, economic, soft power. For the last 500 years, Robert Kaplan, who lives out in Stockbridge, he's a great, brilliant analyst. He writes big books. He's a friend of mine. Kaplan says, think of it this way. For the last 500 years, the locus of power, most of the economic and political and military power in the world, has been in the Mediterranean and in Europe. Think of the Portuguese Empire, and the Spanish Empire, and the Dutch Empire, and Napoleon's very brief, relatively brief empire, but the 150 years of the British Empire. For 500 years, those Europeans, and for the last 80 to 100 years, the United States and Canada with them, that's been where most of the power is. And Kaplan says, broadly defined, over the next couple of decades, a lot of that power is going to shift to the Asia-Pacific region. To whom? To the United States is an Asia-Pacific power. Alaska, Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, and the great engine, California. California on its own would be the 5th largest economy in the world. If it seceded tomorrow, which I deeply hope it won't, because we'd be sunk without California, it'd be the 5th largest economy in the world. So the United States and China and Japan and India and South Korea and Indonesia, by 2050, when the two little grandchildren that my wife and I love are graduating from college and they're young professionals, they'll be beyond that, their generation is going to have to live in a very different world where a lot of the power is in the East. Already, the 4 strongest military powers in the world are the United States, China, Japan, and India. And already, 4 of the 5 largest economies in the world are the United States, China, Japan, India, and the European Union. And I'm quick to tell European audiences, it doesn't mean that you're, history. The European Union's a big economic power, but their day as the primary power is over and power is flowing east. That's a big judgment. It's incontrovertible. Power is shifting. We call it, the Trump administration says quite rightly, don't call it the Asia-Pacific. Call it the Indo-Pacific, because I wonder if we have a laser pointer. We do. If you look at the Persian Gulf and the east coast of Africa, this is the Arabian Sea. Here's the Indian subcontinent. Here's the Bay of Bengal. Here's Southeast Asia, and here's the big Asian economies, Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia. This part of the world is the Indo-Pacific, the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific. That's what we're talking about. That's where the dynamism, the growing economies, the growing militaries are in that region of the world. Now, to reassure us, as I assume a lot of us here are American, if you measure power in absolute terms, the United States is the largest economy, most powerful military. I'm not trying to be arrogant about us. Certainly the strongest political power in the world. In absolute terms, we're still number 1. We have been the number 1 power in the lifetime of every single person in this room. We've never known what it's like to be number 2. But power cannot be measured in just absolute terms. We also have to look at relative terms. Well, how's our power compared to China, India, Japan, European Union? Well, if you look on a relative basis, China is gaining on us. You look at the press, they say China's rising. I say China's returning. Why? Because for 18 of the last 20 centuries, China's had the largest global economy. For 18 of the last 20 centuries. It's only been the 19th and 20th centuries when China was invaded. Think of the Opium Wars of the 1840s by the Europeans and the Americans. And then the Japanese invasion, which nearly killed China. It was a miracle that the Chinese nation, the state, survived the Second World War, but it did. And then Mao, and then the Communist Revolution, and this extraordinary Deng Xiaoping leading a capitalist revolution from 1978 on. China is gaining on us in every category. And our kids and our grandchildren are going to have to think, we're not just number one, we're kind of co-leaders of the world, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, with China. That's going to be a big psychological adjustment for Americans, important for us to understand. And here's the thing about the US and China. This is the 40th anniversary of our resumption of ambassadorial relations. It was Jimmy Carter and Deng Xiaoping who did that. That's my entire career. I joined the Foreign Service as an intern in 1980. So my entire career, until a couple of years ago, we thought of China, China's our partner, and we compete. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've flipped that. Most Democrats, including, say, Elizabeth Warren, and most Republicans, including Donald Trump, agree China's a competitor. This is how we talk about China now, and they talk about us. And we cooperate on the side. Why do we say that? And this is a bipartisan thing. Liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans say China's the great threat. No longer the partner. We have flipped just in the last couple of years. It's a competitor of the United States. I'd like to think we're fighting 4 battles, struggles. We're not literally fighting each other, but 4 differences with China. The first is for strategic, we've veered from strategic engagement to strategic competition. Yes. The first is for military predominance here. Since MacArthur presided over the surrender of Japan, September 2nd, 1945, the United States has had a military alliance with Japan, a military alliance with South Korea, a military alliance with Australia, where I just spent 3 weeks as a fellow in Sydney. We've had defense agreements with New Zealand, and with the Philippines, and with Thailand, and now we have new defense agreements with Vietnam. The Vietnamese say to us, we fought you for 13 years, but we've actually struggled against Chinese power for 1,000 years. Please bring your Navy back to Cam Ranh Bay. Now, for all of us who remember the Vietnam War, that's an unbelievable irony. That the Vietnamese now look at us as kind of a protector, and we remember how bitter that war is. We lost 57,000 young Americans in that war. They lost many more thousands than we did, 1959 to 1973. So the United States has been the kingpin since 1945. Chinese are challenging that. The Chinese are pushing out. They've got a blue water navy. They have advanced ballistic missiles. They're trying to push our carriers, aircraft carriers, off the coast of Southeast Asia. They want to be the #1 power, and that's a big battle between us. The second battle is for technological dominance. We're developing new military technologies. In 15 or 20 years, our military power is going to look nothing like today. When I think of military power now, I think of an aircraft carrier, or I think of an F-35, or I think of a B-2 bomber. In 15 or 20 years, they'll probably be outmoded. It'll be like the horse cavalry was between 1914 and 1918. And in the future, we'll have space-based weapons. And we're going to see artificial intelligence militarized. And quantum computing, the ability to break any code, militarized. And biotechnology, Boston, Cambridge, leading biotech center in the world, militarized. So by the end of our lifetimes, we're not going to recognize the new military technologies, and we're in a fight with the Chinese right now for who's going to get there first. They've got one big advantage. The Chinese military can reach into any Chinese company, Alibaba, Tencent, or any Chinese university, right, Tsinghua University, and say, you're a PhD biotech guy, guess what? You're working for us now. The United States government appropriately cannot go to Google, Amazon, Apple, and say, you're working for us now. We have to convince these young engineers to work for us, and that's kind of a hard pitch these days. And so a lot of people are concerned we're behind the Chinese in that. We're fighting a battle of ideas. Xi Jinping is out giving speeches saying the way forward for the rest of the world is free market economy, authoritarian political system. And guess what? This is going to be my first big criticism of Donald Trump tonight. I apologize if you're Trump supporters. Fire back at me, please, when we get to the Q&A. Challenge me. Our guy's not in the game. President Trump is not out there defending democracy. He's not made it a priority. He's not giving speeches. Ronald Reagan would be all over this, as would John F. Kennedy. They both believed that the American president had to be an advocate for democracy, and right now, it's Xi Jinping and Putin and Mohammed bin Salman and Erdogan. They're all saying, we're the future, strong men, authoritarian politics. We Americans are the natural leader of a democratic world. We need to stand up. This is just a rhetorical battle here and defend our position. And I'm confident that whoever replaces President Trump, either party will do that. And we're fighting this battle for economic supremacy. We both want to be number one. This is going to be the defining issue for the next 30 to 40 years. We will be more engaged in trying to compete with China and yet live in peace. No one wants to fight. No one wants two nuclear powers to fight. This is going to be the highest priority we have in American foreign policy. We have got to get in this. My students are in it. Our grandchildren should be learning Mandarin, and they should be traveling to Beijing and Shanghai and Shenzhen, not just to Paris and London and Rome for nice trips. This is our trend line number 2. And if you want to just look at Europe, Europe is beset by internal crises. Russia is on a long glide path down. It's going to be in the second division of global powers by 2050. It's got a carbon economy. It hasn't reformed it. Its population is declining. Major health crisis, major alcoholism. Russia's almost a broken state. For the time being, it has nuclear weapons. Has the most experienced leader in the world today. I don't discount them now. But by 2050, they're not going to be what they are now. And I think what's really interesting about the future is these 3 countries: India, Brazil, and Nigeria. India is going to be the largest country in the world within 5 or 10 years by population. It's going to pass China. India is going to have the largest global economy, say, by 2080. None of us will be alive unless there's some miracle that saves us all. India is a dynamic free market economy, lots of problems, but big upside. Nigeria, its population is going to double in the next 40 years. The population of sub-Saharan Africa is going to double in the next 40 to 50 years. In the second half of this century, Africa will be the most populous part of the world. It's either going to succeed or not. We've all got to root for Africa. We've all got to root for democratic systems and for growth in Africa. And Brazil, our hemispheric partner, 210 million people, my Brazilian friends say, Brazil is the country of the future and always will be. If anybody's Brazilian, I'm not trying to be critical. That's a Brazilian joke that people tell me. I think Brazil is going to be a superpower, an economic superpower, and hopefully, an environmental superpower. We'll see. We'll see. But it's interesting to watch these 3 countries. These are the countries coming up in the world. Think of Russia, maybe Japan, maybe Europe. They're at their zenith. They're going to come down. Why is the United States, why are we so optimistic about our country? In part because my students and I look at demographics, population. China is aging. South Korea is aging. Japan's aging. Europe's aging. Population growth rates declining. Too many older people, just not enough people working to support the older people. The United States is the second youngest country of all these powers. Why? Immigration and refugees. Since the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, we've been taking in, this is legal immigration now. I'm not talking about people coming across borders illegally, which you can't have. You've got to defend your borders. We've been taking in about 1 million people a year legally. When I was a very young officer, interviewed refugees and immigrants in Rome and in Cairo. We know everything about them. They tend to be very young. They come in family groups. They're late teens, early 20s. They want to be here. They're taken in by faith-based groups. A lot of them come with church groups or mosques or synagogues. And within 5 or 10 years, they've got a small business. And within 20 years, their kids are valedictorians of their high school class. Because, it's the immigrant mentality. We got to succeed. I can't tell you what a wonderful thing it is. I used to swear in our young officers in the State Department and Foreign Service, how many of them were immigrants, or refugees, or first-generation Americans, or first in their family to go to college. And it's wonderful because they look like us. They're brown, they're black, they're white. They're Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Christian. They look like the United States. And that's the power of our country. Immigration gives us, I'm a disciple for immigration, because it makes us more powerful. It's also part of the ethic of the country. E pluribus unum. Out of many people come one American people. It's the classic melting pot. In fact, if I went around the room tonight, we had the time, and I said to every single person, where are you from? And I didn't mean Newton, Weston, Wellesley, Chestnut Hill, Jamaica Plain, Dorchester. We each have an immigrant story. It could be 200 years ago. In my case, it's my grandparents. My dad's parents from Ireland. But this is a typical story. The only group there are two groups who don't have that. The Native Americans, obviously, and the African Americans who were brought here in chains. And that's the disgrace of American history, slavery. Everyone else came here willingly. And when I look at this big debate on immigration, I think about the power of the United States. Without immigration, we are sunk. We are sunk. We won't have enough people in the country to be productive. So that's what my students and I are looking at. We're looking at transnational challenges. What do I mean by that? This is trend line number 3. All the challenges that are going under our borders, over our borders, right through them. Climate change. Trafficking of women and children. There are human cartels selling women and children into enforced prostitution all over the world. Drug cartels, crime cartels, the whole cyber, people trying to invade our bank accounts, people trying to rip off a high-tech company in Cambridge's intellectual property, to cyber warfare, to cyber espionage. We're living in a time when it's very interesting. If you think about this, there are 7.6 billion people in the world. It's like we're all drifting on a boat together. What I mean by that is, for the first time in human history, the fate of all of us is linked by these external problems. And I learned in my career working for President H.W. Bush and President Clinton, George W. Bush, and advising John Kerry, we can't succeed on any of these if we're not working with other countries. If we try to go it alone, we fail. Climate change? It's going to take all 7.6 billion of us and our kids and grandchildren to fight climate change. So this produces a different dynamic in international politics. Our presidents need to be coalition builders. My second criticism of President Trump tonight, there'll be many. He took us out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Okay, it was a beginning. It didn't end climate change. There are 194 countries in the Paris Climate Change Agreement. There's one country in the world not in it, us. And we and the Chinese are the largest carbon emitters. So if there's ever going to be a recipe to fix it, we and the Chinese got to lead it. President Obama and Xi Jinping got together in 2015 and said, okay, we'll lead together. That's what brought us to Paris. President Trump took us out. I'm a climate change acceptor. I'm not a denier. I think this is madness. But that's trend line number 3. We need to be working across borders on those problems. Here's number 4, us. Us. Largest economy, strongest military, most important dynamic country, the natural leader of the world. What's happened? I have questions. I'll just pose them as questions. Are we going to continue to lead in the world? To consider ourselves a leader? That's how FDR, Eisenhower, Reagan, all the Republican and Democratic presidents until now said, yes, the United States has to lead. Are we leading now? Second, are we going to withdraw from the world? Dig a moat around the country. Build walls. Pull up the drawbridges. America's great. You don't have to talk to anybody. Perfect recipe for the world of November 21st, 1819. When we had very little trade, and the Atlantic and Pacific protected us, and most people didn't leave their hometowns. Now we live in the 21st century where everything has changed. 1 of every 7 jobs in the country depends on exports. All those transnational problems, things coming to kill us unless we work with other countries to defend ourselves. I think I know the answer to that. Think about this statement. I interviewed Condoleezza Rice, who's a very good friend of mine. I worked for her twice. I interviewed her 2 years ago. Aspen, Colorado, 800 people in the audience. I asked her the following question. Condi, what are you worried about? And what I thought the question I was asking was, are you worried about Kim Jong-un, Putin, nuclear weapons? What are the biggest threats? Without missing a beat, she answered a different question. She said that. She said, we've lost our self-confidence. I said, what do you mean? She said, we've lost our self-confidence. We've lost the belief that the United States is a great country with a great role to play in the world. That really shook me up. Mainly because I think she's right. Reagan gave us, I'm going to be an equal opportunity Republican. Reagan gave us confidence. President Reagan made us feel that the country had a great future. It's exactly how FDR made my mom and dad's generation feel. That's how John F. Kennedy made me feel as a 7-year-old in Wellesley, Massachusetts. We've lost our self-confidence. She wants to lead. She wants us to lead. She wants us to be out in the world, not trying to resolve every problem, not being the cop at every corner. But when it matters to us, we're there. And we're cooperating with other countries. And we've lost that. That's Condi Rice. Boy, you have to think about that. Are we going to lead or not? I just say that because look at our history. The history of isolationism. It's like this errant gene in the national DNA. It didn't hurt us when Washington said, beware of entangling alliances. 1798. It didn't hurt us on July 24th, 1821, when our guy, John Quincy Adams, from Braintree, Massachusetts, said about America, she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy, we should stay at home. It really hurt us when Lindbergh campaigned America First to keep us out of the Second World War, but FDR outmaneuvered it. And the people saw that we had to respond during the Battle of Britain to protect Britain and the countries of Europe. But in 2019, it is foolish and it is simply unreasonable to suggest that we can just stay at home and build a wall around the country and not be a leader. I feel passionate about this because I know it's true. We have got to be citizens of the world. I'm looking at a lot of concerned faces. We've just gone through 4 trend lines that are real downers. So I'm going to tell you a true story. I gave a lecture like this about 4 or 5 years ago at Harvard, and my wife, Libby, we've been married 38 and a half years. She's from Weston. She came. And it was this kind of lecture. Tell us about the major problems in the world. So we were walking home to Cambridge, and I said, how'd that go? And there was a pause. And she said, you're depressing everybody. I said, what do you mean I'm depressing everybody? I'm just trying to tell these students. She said, I get, this is a big teachable moment for me, and I really credit my wife. She said, I get that there are all these problems out there. What are you hopeful about? And are there hopeful trend lines that can balance these really heavy, negative, worrisome ones? And so as a teacher, what I do now at the end of every semester, I have classes of 65 to 80 students from all over the world. And I say to them, I send them an email, I say, tell me what you think the 5 most positive trend lines are in the world. What are you hopeful about? These are all millennials. They're between 23 and 35 years of age. What are you hopeful about? Because we spent the whole semester talking about what can kill us. So last May's class came back with this. This is hope. What are the hopeful, positive things happening in our world? Number 1, this one. Since Deng Xiaoping launched the great capitalist revolution in the late 70s, 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty in China. In China, you can hear me? Okay. Another one. Okay. How's that? Better.
Oh, yeah.
China, India, Sub-Saharan Africa, Brazil, Caribbean. 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty. It's a miracle. Never in the history of the world have 1 billion people been lifted out of poverty. It happened the last 30 years. It should be on the headline of every paper every day just to remind us with all the bad news what a positive thing that is. Another 1 billion can be lifted out of poverty in the next 30 to 40 years. The economies are strong. Second, we're making major strides, we, the human race, on global public health. Let me just illustrate it for a minute. We have not eradicated a global disease since we eradicated smallpox. We're within 3 to 5 years of eradicating polio. It only exists now in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nigeria. In very isolated villages, small numbers of people. My mom had polio in 1949 in Hingham and nearly died from it. This is before Dr. Salk's vaccine 3 years later. If you go back in our families, in any part of the country, our grandparents and our great-grandparents really had to worry about polio, either killing a kid or crippling a child or a young adult. That's going to be wiped off in 3 to 5 years, no more polio. Bill Gates on malaria says we can develop a malaria vaccine and we can wipe out malaria in his lifetime. He's a young man, he's 65 years old. I think that's young. Last year, about 500,000 young kids below the age of 5 died of malaria in sub-Saharan Africa. You could save all those lives. And HIV, and that's a big issue in our society and around the world, is now more a chronic disease than a mortal illness because of the presence of antiretroviral drugs. How did this happen? University research, public health consciousness, money, Michael Bloomberg, Melinda Gates, Bill Gates plowing billions into polio vaccines and HIV vaccines, and corporations donating. The Japanese, the Europeans, the Americans, the United Nations. It's been a virtuous thing. We never read about it. It's happening. People are going to live longer. Our grandchildren will live much longer than we do. Good. Human progress. Isn't that wonderful? Here's a big one. The rise of women. And what's interesting, look at every response. The young men in my class believe this is a virtuous goal, as well as the young women in my class. Not happening everywhere. I have students from Saudi Arabia. Female students from the Arab Sunni world. Not happening for them. It's not happening in some traditional societies that are patriarchal. It's happening in Western Europe. In Sweden and Norway, every corporate board, by law, must have at least 50-50 female-male representation. Lots of female leaders, prime ministers in European countries. We haven't had a female president yet. I worked on the losing campaign in 2016. I was very hopeful that she would make history and that we would with her. But that day's going to come. And there are certainly, I look at the young women in my class, from a lot of countries, they have opportunities that my wife's generation had and my mom's generation never had. And so we have to push this forward. And that's really important for the men in the room to be invested. My wife and 3 daughters tell me. Just the women in the world. Here's the last one, the promise of technology. This is interesting. Because I'm older, I see technology as kind of a double-edged sword. Give you an example. Bill Gates wrote a great article last year about gene editing. It's happening in Cambridge, and in Boston, and in Oxford, and Cambridge, and in Japan. Bill Gates says it could unlock unbelievable human potential. He said, but ethically, if you misuse gene editing, you could destroy the human race. I thought that was a really interesting, it's a 6-page article. I think it's April, May 2018 in Foreign Affairs. Read it, Google it tonight. Bill Gates, I see the downside, the double edge. My students are young. They say, we can cure cancer. We can make a carbon-free world by 2050. And I love the youthful energy. I think a lot of Erica, Janice, and I are both all educators. The energy and optimism of young people is infectious, and they're not cynical. And that's when great things happen. when young people can drive us forward. So isn't that great? I've left you with a little bit of hope. Last thought, a little bit of hope. Okay, I'm going to finish here, then we're going to have a conversation. But I got to finish with Churchill. It's such a great story. In the middle of the Second World War, Winston Churchill came to Cambridge, Massachusetts. September 6, 1943 to be exact. He had just been down to see FDR. They began to plan the D-Day offensive in September 1943. And it was a really interesting time of the war. He came to Harvard to get an honorary degree. He walked out of Sanders Theater, and he walked into Harvard Yard, and there were 6,000 American cadets standing in formation in Harvard Yard. These were all college students who left college. My dad was one of these students, not at Harvard Yard, but left BU, and he went down to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, entered the Marine Corps, and they trained on the university campuses. And our colleges emptied out of the men, at least, and a lot of the women, 16 million men and women in uniform by 1943. So Harvard had 6,000 young Americans just who had left college in their freshman, sophomore, junior years. They're in uniform, they're training, they're standing at attention. Churchill gives a speech, and I kind of thought one thing that was happening that morning at Harvard Yard was that the United States was becoming, by then, or had become, the greatest world power. We had passed Britain sometime in 1941 or 42, and Churchill knew that. I kind of thought that speech was Churchill handing the baton of leadership off to these young Americans. There was something else happening. We were going to win the war. It was clear by September 6, 1943. Montgomery had stopped, the British Eighth Army had stopped Rommel at El Alamein, west of Alexandria, Egypt, so Rommel wasn't going to take the Suez Canal and the Middle East oil fields. And the Soviets had stopped 8 months before the German Sixth Army of von Paulus at Stalingrad. Bloodiest battle in the history of the world. 1 million people died for that Soviet victory. But they stopped the Germans from getting the Caspian oil fields. It's all about energy, the power of the world. And we had invaded Sicily by September 1943 and occupied it. We kicked the Italians and Germans out, and we were just about to invade Italy. We were going to win the war. And so it's a really big moment. Churchill on the steps of Memorial Church, the students before him, in a very long speech, here was his message to them. The price of greatness, he said, is responsibility. The price of greatness is responsibility. You are now the greatest power in the world. And with that power comes responsibility for the world. You are the most powerful country. You have to be outward looking. Isn't that a perfect way to think about our challenge today? Thank you very much.
And please identify yourself.
Goodale from Winchester, Mass. And there's a class of 66 here at LaSalle. What does Hong Kong's present turmoil say about China, and what about China's future with Hong Kong?
What a great question. Did everybody have a question?
No.
The Hong Kong demonstrations and disturbances, what does it tell us about China now? And what does it tell us about how the world should look at it? Was that the second part of the question? How the world should look at what's happening. So we could organize an entire course at LaSalle or Harvard on your question. And maybe we should. Maybe we do have those courses. I just say two things. To me, and I've tried to travel to China a lot to be conversant. I'm not a China specialist, but I was there for 2 weeks this summer, 5 cities. You see this incredible society. There are airports, there are bullet trains. It's powerful, their modernity. Frankly, compare the T to the Beijing Metro, you don't want to go there. But we got something they don't have. We're a democracy, and we have human freedom. And they have an increasingly authoritarian government. cracking down on the Chinese people. Hong Kong, to me, is a harbinger of battles to come for the future of the Chinese people. I just don't think that 1.3 billion Chinese, no matter the fact that all their standards of living have increased, people are a lot better off than they were economically 40 years ago. In a connected world, with 350,000 Chinese in LaSalle and Harvard and every place else in the country, all those kids are going to go back to China and say, oh, we live in a big brother state. There are cameras everywhere. My wife started counting them as we would walk down streets. Hundreds of people cameras looking at you, facial recognition. We were fingerprinted twice in 15 minutes in the Beijing airport when we arrived. Big brother surveillance state, crackdown on human freedom. Is that the way the Chinese people are going to live? And I think that Hong Kong people, because they've lived in a relatively free society since the 19th century, British rule, and now they have this agreement with the Chinese government that 50 years after 1997, they're supposed to be free, but China's cracking down already. That's why people are in the streets. Ultimately, I don't see how the protesters win in the short term. At some point, the Chinese military is going to come in and crack down on these young kids, and they're all young kids. But that's just the first skirmish in a 30 or 40-year struggle inside China about human freedom. And my wife and I live in 7 countries. We're not perfect. We're not always right. But you know what? We're a great country, mainly because of the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights and freedom of the press and freedom of speech and religious freedom. That's our secret. That's why the rest of the world wants what we have. That's why we have people flooding, trying to get into the United States. Human freedom. China doesn't have that. So that'd be my answer. What's our obligation? We're not going to go to war. If China cracks down, the United States is not going to send its military in. We don't have a military obligation. We can't risk the war. Think of it as, it'll be unfortunate for those people. First skirmish in a long Chinese fight about who they are. We need to sanction them. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen 2 weeks from now. It could happen 3 months from now. There has to be some penalty that the rest of the world exacts on China if they crack down on what is largely a peaceful movement. Not always. There's been some violence in the last couple of weeks. You've seen it. This is pretty much a peaceful protest movement. People want to live under a rule of law system. They don't want to live under a communist system. People of Hong Kong have never lived under communism, and now they're going to have to at some point. It's a shame. Great question. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Gil Tierney, LaSalle Village resident. I'd like to thank you for an inspiring speech, and I wonder if it's not possible to get a text of your speech. Could we at least get a list of the PowerPoints?
Absolutely. I'll give Professor Barrett the PowerPoint presentation, and you can just get access to it. Behind it, I have slides on every part of the world. I didn't want to subject you to a 5-hour lecture. If you'd like to look at it, we'll give it to Janice.
Just keep in mind that one of our students is here, Ellie, and she's training Michael. She's a sophomore, and they are videotaping Professor Burns' lecture, and we are going to be putting it up on my LaSalle. And thank you for allowing us to videotape it. And I will make sure that at the village, is Ann Doyle here? I don't know.
Yeah, we can get.
I can. Hi, Ann. Ann Doyle is another vice president who's here tonight. Thank you. I'll email it to you, okay? And you can distribute it.
Good.
Do we have another question?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, sorry. We'll come down.
We'll get it
I'm sorry, I missed it. We'll be right back.
Dick Langston, I'm a Duke resident and former chairman of the board here. I have a little trouble reconciling your comments about China, which I agree with entirely, and your selection of Saudi Arabia is such a significant force for the future. I don't remember ever buying anything except gasoline that came out of the Saudi source. And if we are really going to succeed in a post-carbon economy, they would seem to be either dead
Have a
or
limited future.
dying. Yes.
Yeah. Well, let me explain. I took a 3.5-month course and condensed it into 30, 35 minutes. I would say in the world today, there are 5 or 6 great, powerful countries. The United States, the European Union because of its economy, China, Russia, Japan, India. There's a second tier by economic weight, military power, political stability, lack of corruption. And that would include Brazil, that would include South Africa, Nigeria, that would include Saudi Arabia by size of economy. And at least in a carbon-driven world, one of the leading producers of oil, although the leading producer of oil and gas in the world is the United States, mainly because of fracking, by the way, mainly because of fracking. And so I think for now, Saudi Arabia is kind of in that second division. They're part of the G20 because of their size of their economy and their petro power. I would consign them to the same division as Russia by 2050. If they're not going to reform their economy and not going to reform their feudal system that represses women and that keeps people down in their society, if they continue to be an authoritarian dictatorship and to murder their citizens as they murdered Jamal Khashoggi, I don't think they have a great future. And I'm not a big fan of Mohammed bin Salman, this impetuous young crown prince. So they're very much in the second division, and they'll maybe slide further down depending on whether they can reform or not. Countries are powerful because they accept that change is a constant. No corporation stays the same. If you stay the same, you're going to end up losing, right? Everybody, and there's a dynamism to the market. There's a dynamism in politics too. And I don't see Saudi Arabia changing fast enough to make up for their deficiencies. I hope that answers your question.
Can you go to the back of the room? Oh, I'm sorry.
Here you go. Get your chance.
Yeah.
My name is Lawrence Clifford. I'm also a resident of the South. You have a colleague at Kenny School of Government by the name of Graham Allison.
I do.
In keeping with your remarks about China and the United States, and in the near, sort of near future, Allison's book raises the question about the ascending power.
It does.
He calls it the Thucydides trap.
Yes.
Can you comment on that within the keeping of your remarks about what might happen?
Thank you. What a brilliant question. Thank you for it. My friend Graham Allison is an eminent professor at Harvard. He wrote the best book on the Cuban Missile Crisis 50 years ago as a Harvard graduate student called Essence of Decision. He's now written a book called Destined for War, which has become an international bestseller. Xi Jinping has read the book and refers to it. The basic thesis is, he says, is there a Thucydides trap? Thucydides, ancient historian of ancient Greece, writing 2,300 years ago, said it was the rise of Athens, city-states, and the fear that inspired in Sparta that caused the Peloponnesian War. So Graham is a project at Harvard Kennedy School. He's just down the hall from me. He's a good friend. A lot of his young research assistants, for the last 5 or 6 years, they've been looking through history. They say there have been 26 occasions in the last 2,500 years where the number one power has been challenged by the second rising power. And in 14 of those 26 historical incidents, they've gone to war because the top power fears the power nipping at its heels. And so Graham asked the very relevant and intelligent question, is that what's happening now? Is the established power of the United States looking behind, over our shoulder at the big Chinese economy, the bigger Chinese military, the self-confidence that Xi Jinping has, maybe that we lack? And are we going to end up in a war because we don't want to lose our position? Are we going to miscalculate? Or are they going to attack us in a bid to topple us? And Graham fears that we may end up in a conflict with China if we're not smart. He's not predicting it, but he fears. I would say 2 things. What is missing in his historiography is that the presence of nuclear weapons changes everything in the psychology of competition. We've only had atomic and nuclear weapons now for 75 years, 74 years to be exact. And we've not had a great power conflict in 74 years. We've had a lot of wars, regional wars, Korea, Vietnam, Vietnam, Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq. But we haven't fought the Soviet Union. We didn't fight the Soviet Union. We're not fighting modern Russia. And since 1951, 52, Korean War, we haven't fought the Chinese. Why? A lot of people would say it's mutually assured destruction, that it was irrational for any of us, Russian, Chinese, American, to think we could fight each other because we would destroy the world. If that fight ended up with an exchange of nuclear weapons. Think of October 1962. How many people in the room remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? I was just shy of my 8th birthday. A lot of you were my age or older. A lot of you.
Alice flew Cuba.
Did you? Were you in the military at that time? So Kennedy asked the following question to that executive committee, the 16 are all men. Now it'd be different. You have a lot of women around the table now. They're all men. If we get into a shooting war, how many people would die? Nobody could answer the question. Graham and I have discussed this. If there had been a full-fledged nuclear war in October 1962, is the number 100 million people conservative? Maybe it is. If you think about everybody dead between the Ural Mountains, right about here, everybody between the Urals and the Rockies would have been subject to a nuclear strike. Either you're killed on impact, or if you live out in Hopkinton or Worcester and the nuclear weapon lands right here, you die of fallout within a couple of days or a couple of weeks. I mean, none of us can even get our arms around 100 million or 150 million people. We can't even grasp it. It's too big a number. And a lot of us think, at least that's psychology, that we understand nuclear weapons and that rational governments won't attack each other and fight each other because of it. It's worked for 74 years. Here's the problem with that theory. We need to be perfect. One mistake by Xi Jinping or Putin or Donald Trump or anybody else, and we are doomed. Here's the other problem with it. We knew the Soviets were rational. We knew that Mao, even with his revolutionary hat on, was rational. Our presidents were rational. Was Osama bin Laden rational? If he had nuclear weapons, would he have used them on 9/11 in Manhattan? A nuclear suitcase bomb? I think he would have. If he had biological, he lost 3,000 people in the attacks, most in New York, and many in the Pentagon, but most in New York. Chemical weapons attack that day, depending on the winds, could have killed a lot of people in New Jersey, or New York State, or Connecticut. Biological weapons attack could have killed hundreds of thousands of people in New York, not 3,000. So the problem is, states might be rational, but how about extreme, wild-eyed, evil extremists? And they could be white nationalists in the United States, or they could be wild-eyed terrorists halfway across the world. As Tom Friedman said so memorably, I really admire Tom Friedman, he said, what happened to us on 9/11? 21 guys went to war with us. That never happened to us before. We've been attacked by countries, Japan, on Pearl Harbor. We had fought in the Confederacy's rebellion against the Union, I call it. We had fought that war, but we had never been attacked by 21 young guys in airplanes. And so that's when Graham's theory gets really troubling. What it means to me is a long answer, and I apologize, but you've asked the most important question tonight. What it means to me is we're going to have to live with the Chinese, and they're going to have to live with us. We cannot think of them as our enemy. As a diplomat, I tell my students, enemy is a strong word. It means we're about to fight. Call them a competitor. Call them a rival. Call them an adversary. But don't demonize them. And we're going to have to balance these two things that I talked about on global trend number 2. We're going to have to compete with them and cooperate and keep those two contradictory impulses in harmony. That's why you need diplomats. That's why you need the Masha Yovanovitches of the world. That's why our president should be globally aware and sophisticated. I don't believe in on-the-job training. An equal opportunity critic. Donald Trump was the first American president in history with no prior experience in government or the military or politics. And in my humble estimation, it shows. But I'm going to be an equal opportunity critic. I think probably the most interesting person on the stage all year has been a 37-year-old. And I think he's brilliant, he's articulate, he's a good human being, but he's 37. And he's been mayor of a city of 102,000 people. It's not enough experience to have that power. I mean, age, all of us can agree. I think experience and wisdom, if the stakes are that, judgment. That matters. We have whole courses under question at LaSalle. Thank you. Other questions, comments?
Just cyber war here makes.
Pardon?
And cyber war here makes.
Exactly. So this gentleman says, add cyber war if I want to depress you more. My friends in the military tell me, in the intelligence world, tell me, God forbid the next big conflict is going to start in cyberspace. The first thing that our adversaries will try to do with us is blind us. They'll take out our satellites. No more GPS, right? No more internet. Mass confusion at Newton. You won't know how to get to Brookline. We used to know how to get to Brookline without those machines. No, it's all about the water system. It's about electricity. It's about powering our economy. We're a linked society. We're not the 1974 society when I met Mrs. Barrett at Wellesley High School. And so that's going to be the first round. And we're going to try to knock out their satellites. And then we're going to fight in the skies, in the heavens. And then all hell breaks loose. We don't want to go there. So we can't think of Russia and China, we're going to overpower them and fight them and kill them. That's madness. Not with the destructive power we have. We're going to hold our ground, defend democracy, not let Putin take over Ukraine. That's why this impeachment thing to me is so important. President Trump gave away the store to Putin on Ukraine. We've got to be smart about this, but we can't think about winning a war with China or Russia because that means certain death and destruction of our societies. Boy, the stakes are high. This is why we need smart people in the Oval Office. And in Congress, I've supported Joe Biden. I think he's got the experience, and I'm supporting Joe Kennedy as well. You don't need to know my political views. Yes, sir. A young person needs to ask a
There's a
question.
student who has a question. We do have a student here, one of my students from Saudi Arabia. Graduate student, stand up.
Listen, feel free to criticize.
First of all, let me start by saying my name. My name is Wasil Afan. I am indeed from Saudi Arabia.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. I've learned a lot today. But just to add a perspective,
Sure.
I think there is a big issue. Big part of it is from us as Saudis. We don't communicate to the world very well. I've always said that and spoke about that. One of the questions that was said that Saudi Arabia will go away because there is no oil, and that is something that we recognize as a country the last couple of years, and we've been changing our economy very much. I think one of the biggest investments that the country has done is students like me. There's a lot of my fellow students here investing in humans because we have more than 50% of our population is below the age of 25.
That's amazing.
And education is the biggest part that the country is investing in. And that is why we have a more fast pace in change when it comes to climate change than, for example, the United States, because we have a younger generation. I think, as you said, if we don't recognize that the world is changing and we don't change and improve as individuals and as a country, then we are going to be left behind. We have a lot to work front, but I think part of it as well is for the world to recognize that we are working in that aspect and not always be demonized. Most of the time, we are very demonized and we are looked, every time I look at a thing, when I search something in Saudi, it's always negative. For example, no one knows that Saudi is the most improving country by the last, economically is the most improving country by far in numbers. But we are still number 36 in the world right now. Just to keep that short, I think a part of the issue in a global economy that people have to communicate very well, and we don't have to see each other as competitors in terms of, I know the world, competition is important, but I know that if we don't stand together and help each other, and we demonize everybody, I think we are going into a future that we have to combat climate change as a global society because it doesn't know anyone. And I think that's one of the things as a Saudi, I know there's a lot of my fellow Saudi females, for example, that are here when it comes to women improvement. I don't know if she would agree with me, but we are improving. I would say in my country she will have a better chance of getting a job than I would do because we are trying to push that. We are still way behind, but I think we are striving to be better and to catch up with the world and be part of it.
Thank you very much. Well said. Thank you for having the courage to stand up, and let me just say you're most welcome. I hope you feel that.
No, of course.
In our society. I say that because the Trump administration is essentially trying to keep out of the United States Muslim immigrants and Muslim refugees from 9 majority Muslim countries. I've joined a lawsuit of former federal officials against President Trump because this is race-based and religious-based discrimination. And if we are anything, we're a multi-religious society. We have 7 million Muslims living peacefully and well, patriotically. They're just as equal as anybody else in this society. So thank you for being here. Thank you. And I really hope that that your self-confidence about your society is going to come true, that you can change that society. My comments were really about the government of Saudi Arabia, kingdom, about the treatment of women, but also the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And I would say the unnecessary war in Yemen. I know it's complicated, but you were good to stand up. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
What do you see coming out of the Middle East?
What I see.
Is it going to become itself? Wars usually start with a lot of times with religion.
Yeah.
And the Arab Spring was a great thing. It's
right. So I'll repeat the question. What do we see happening in the Middle East? The Arab Spring of 2011 was a very hopeful moment for a lot of people, but they slid back. Here's another question where we have a whole course. Another one question. I would say, but I'm happy to be corrected by anybody who's here from the Middle East. I think a difficult next decade or two. I have a whole slide presentation on the Middle East, but just a couple of data points. There are 22 countries in the Arab world, and there's Israel, and there's Iran, and there's Turkey. That's the modern Middle East. Just look at the map. You can all see where the Middle East is. There's a civil war in Libya. 5 different groups fighting for power. The Russians are there on the ground, fighting with one of the groups. It's chaotic. People are suffering in Libya. There's a civil war in Yemen. The greatest, worst cholera outbreak in modern history has been the last year in Yemen. It's a proxy war. It's a Shia-Sunni struggle for power. The Iranians, the big Shia power, are supporting the Houthi rebels against Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the Gulf states, protecting the Sunni population. Struggle for power, almost equally divided, mass loss of life, indiscriminate bombings by both sides, and civilians are being killed. There's Iraq, social order breaking down. Still a country separated Shia, Sunni, Kurd, fractured state. There's Syria. The war began there in 2011. The pre-war population was 22.4 million people, 12 million of them homeless. Think of that. Think of the United States with more than half of our country homeless, more than half the country. 5 million Syrian refugees outside the country, in the Arab world, in Turkey, in Europe, in Canada. We've taken very few Syrian refugees. The Canadians have taken 5 times as many. And the Canadians are 36 million, and we're 326 million. Think about that for a moment, about the price of greatness' responsibility. 7 million homeless inside the country, Shia or Sunni or Kurd in the wrong place. And so civilians have to flee militia groups. I mean, the Arab people are suffering. And I must tell you, 2 weeks ago, I spent 3 days in the West Bank. I chair an organization called Our Generation Speaks. My friend Deval Patrick had chaired it. He asked me to take over. He's now running for president. I deeply admire Deval Patrick. This organization tries to do one thing. Can we have young Palestinians and young Israelis build businesses together so their generation builds peace? So my board and I, almost all Boston-based people, spent 3 days on the West Bank and another day in Jerusalem 2 weeks ago. What did I see in the West Bank? It's a prison. The Palestinians are completely subjected to a military occupation that denies them freedom, that denies them any opportunity to have businesses. You should see the growth of the settlements and the growth of on the Jewish side and the growth of the Israeli side, the growth of the refugee camps on the Palestinian side. I'm a strong supporter of the state of Israel. I'm going there in 2 weeks. But I deeply believe that Israel has made a series of massive mistakes in its colonization of the West Bank. And so and those poor Palestinians, no hope for a state or justice because of what's happened. So I must say, I look across the Arab world as challenges and made the young people here from the Arab world leave here, go back, and produce better societies and maybe solve some of these conflicts if they can. But I have great sympathy for the Arab peoples. I think in general, very poor leadership in many other countries. Maybe Tunisia is the great beacon. Tunisia has got a hybrid government of Islamists and Democrats. But they're living together in peace so far. Maybe Morocco, because the king has devolved some power to the parliament. He's very smart. Maybe the King Abdullah II of Jordan. He's been a benevolent leader. He's tried to harbor a lot of Palestinians and help them. But you don't see that kind of inspired leadership in other places. So I think Americans need to do our best to help. And that means, being responsible. No more land wars, however. When Bob Gates, I deeply admire him, left as Secretary of Defense, he had served both President Bush and President Obama on a nonpartisan basis. He said publicly, the next American Secretary of Defense who advises an American president to put a big American land army into a Middle East country and occupies it ought to have his or her head examined. We've learned our lessons from the occupation of Iraq, and I think from the occupation of Afghanistan. This is not about our soldiers. Our soldiers were valiant. It's about people like me, our political leaders, our diplomats. We need to learn the lessons of what happened to us over the last 18 years, going on 19 since 9/11. I've kept you here a long time. Maybe let's end on hope. What are we hopeful about? Those 4 trend lines that my students.
Winning the election.
Winning the election. Depending who your candidate is. Winning the election. Someone's got to win the election. What else are we hopeful about?
Green energy.
Thank you. Green energy. So am I. It's a positive revolution, right?
It better be.
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you. We need a massive conversion of our economy to green energy. Absolutely. Or else we're going to choke on the carbon economy.
We are choking on it.
Thank you for that.
Do we have time for one more question?
One more bit of hope.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes left.
Okay.
One more.
The infectiousness of freedom as a beacon to young people. A lot of the demonstrations that are going on in those countries are young people.
I love what you just said. I mean, you know, part of Graham Allison told me when I came to Harvard 10 years ago after my diplomatic career, he said, you're going to love university. He said it's the union of the old, and maybe we have a little bit of experience and wisdom, hopefully, and the infectious optimism and energy of the young. And that's what LaSalle is. And that's what Harvard is. That's what BC is. That's what Northeastern is. And that gives me hope. My students do give me hope. You know, we have, unfortunately, we're bequeathing the students here a lot of challenges. But we're going to be behind, trying to make this a more just world, more peaceful world in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.